Good afternoon, everyone. Well, we've got a fantastic Road Ahead session planned for you this afternoon, where we look forward to all of the capabilities that are coming and the things that we are building to support your work. But just humor me for a moment while we look backwards, because as we've run this session over the last few years, we've started to do that, to talk about these things that are upcoming. But actually today, as I reflect back through the day, many of these technologies that we've talked about over the last few years in the road ahead are not only here and available, but actively being used in production systems. We've seen National Highways and Connect Plus services collaborating and using living digital twins to run the state of our road networks. We've seen the Crown Estate doing the same thing in the marine environment. Through the Customer Success Awards that we've just seen, many of the entries, and in fact some of the winners, have been building digital twins that operate our world, operate the systems of our world and bring insight. We've seen geography connecting information together throughout a variety of sessions, and digital twins of all shapes and sizes throughout the day. The system that we have, ArcGIS, is helping to make these things real. And it's extending these approaches to more people than ever before. So why am I talking about what we already have in a session that's called The Road Ahead? Well, I genuinely believe that we are only scratching the surface of what is possible here. And if we are going to unite our world and solve some of these problems that we've been talking about throughout the day, then there's a real need to work together. Lauren, this morning, she talked in our opening session about the power of the Living Atlas, the importance of bringing information together, of collaborating and sharing. We talked about using geography as an index to bridge systems. And the need for these systems in our world is just tangible. It's really visible. 2 weeks ago, it was Monday, I was in a meeting, and I got probably the most bizarre text message that I've ever received. It was just after midday, and this message came through to me. It had 4 words in it. It simply said, "Have you got electricity?" And I was like, yeah. And then I started to Google power outages, and I started to see, after a few minutes, the breaking news headlines coming through, telling us what we all now know, that large parts of Spain, Portugal, and the south of France were operating without power. You see, the systems of our world are materially connected. That message actually came from one of my colleagues in Esri, Spain. He was in Madrid, and he experienced one of the scariest days of his life as the systems around him begun to shut down. We had a mini view of that yesterday, right? I was here setting up for today, and I tried to go home. I went to Westminster Tube Station, and I found that there was a massive outage, and the power networks had, I think, blipped for a small amount of time, which had caused cascading failures across the network. We see these cascading issues when things go wrong. There's a real need to model this information in our world more accurately. The systems of our world are materially connected. They're intrinsically related. And as I was thinking about this, I was thinking about that word intrinsically. I thought, well, that's probably quite a good word to use, isn't it? So I looked it up. And this is the dictionary definition, right? Where things are inherently or essentially connected. The systems of our world, they are inseparably related through geography and fundamental to each other. So this afternoon, what Mathew and Richard are going to model for us is we're going to imagine a world where the systems of our world, they're intrinsically related, but this intrinsic connectivity can be modeled through geography. So let's take a look at that. Mathew.
Thank you very much, Mark. So just to elaborate a bit on that, digital twins are representations of systems in the physical world. They come in all different shapes and sizes. So you can have a digital twin of a human body or a car, all the way through to, I suppose, more relevant to us in the GIS space, digital twins of utility networks or even entire cities. What differentiates them from, say, just a kind of a diagram or a map of a system is that they don't just look like the system they're trying to represent, they actually behave like it too. So you can give them a set of inputs or parameters, and they'll respond as the real-world system would. So if we take this conference center, for example, if we wanted to model how it would respond in the event of a sudden increase in heat, like during a heat wave. In an ideal world, we could model this with a digital twin, turn a virtual thermostat, and see how our energy and water usage would increase as we try and cool the building. If we go a step further into the future, we might even be able to model how the people inside it would react. So how would things like focus be affected, or how would incidents of headaches and heat stroke increase? So this is where digital twins can kind of begin to bring real value, when they can tell us how a system would respond in a situation that it's never seen before. So this is becoming increasingly important with climate change. Increasingly, our systems are going to be exposed to natural hazards or disasters that they've never seen before. So modeling the effects of hazards like this is going to become vital to identify key points of failure and avoid unexpected disruption. Better still, though, if we can begin to model interdependencies. So critical systems rarely operate in isolation. They nearly always rely on other systems to function effectively. Take something as essential as drinking water. It, of course, relies on a network of pipes to transport water around the country. But to construct and maintain these pipes, it requires a transport network. To communicate, it requires a functioning kind of internet connection as well as electricity. Now, these systems are so entangled that a seemingly small disruption in one part of the network can have significant and often unpredictable ripple effects in dependent networks, and I'm very proud of this animation here. So to keep providing essential services, we need to begin to model these interdependencies in our digital twins, but where to begin? Well, the answer lies in geography. So geography is the common language shared by all things in the physical world. So an electricity substation, a disconnected customer, a water pump, a water pipe can all be located with coordinates. Which brings me on to the really exciting part of this session. So I know I've spoken for a fair amount of time about digital twins, but to help me demonstrate this and demonstrate the unifying power of geography, we're going to take a step away from the digital world momentarily and back into the era of physical mapping. So if you've been in this room today, and especially if you've been in this front corner over here, you may have noticed a mysterious object under a sheet. It's since been unveiled, but this has been a bit of a labor of love for us in the research team over the last few months, so I'm very excited that we can share it here today. So if we could just bring the lights up over there and switch the camera feed on. So this is a diorama or a model, and it represents a well-known town in the Scottish Highlands. Its terrain is modelled on Scottish Government elevation data. Vegetation matches real-world patterns. Its roads and neighbourhoods reflect those you would find in the actual area. You could say it's a physical twin. But because this is still primarily a GIS conference, we have also created a digital twin of the same area. And here it is. So the same features are represented in both the digital and the physical. So in our digital twin, we've got a slightly more complex road network, a few more buildings and trees, but primarily the same features are represented in each. Each handcrafted building represents about 10 digital buildings, and each tree represents 20 trees. Now, I hope you'll forgive us for the generalization, but this was our first diorama. The coolest part of all, though, is that our two twins are in sync. So what's represented in one will be represented in the other. So to make this possible, we've positioned various sensors around our physical twin. So if my assistant Richard could just point these out. We've got a water sensor monitoring the water level in the river. we've also got a light sensor monitoring the light level. We've hidden them well, but we've also got some sensors monitoring the physical twin's very own utility network and transport network. So to give you a bit of a taster of some of the capabilities we've built here, we're going to introduce one quite unusual neighborhood. So that's this one up in the hills. So when it comes to renewable energy, this neighborhood is a very forward-thinking and conscientious community, as it relies, as you can see, hopefully on the roofs of the houses, it relies entirely on solar panels. And when I say entirely, I mean entirely. So no backup generators, no battery storage, just solar panels. That does, however, mean that when there is no sun, the neighborhood has no power. So if we could just get the lights to dim slowly for that. So as the light sensor goes down in the physical twin, we can see the lights in the digital twin go down. The lights in that neighborhood have gone off, and so have the lights in the digital twin, as is reflected with the red buildings. So let's put our solar neighborhood out of their misery and just bring the lights back up. So already we've used our digital twin and our physical twin to identify that we may need some battery storage in this neighborhood. Now I can see Richard is about to reach for his water jug, so I think it's time we moved on to another scenario. So being in Scotland, our physical twin experiences its fair share of rain, but I'm going to forecast now that it might be about to experience some once-in-a-century rainfall. So this is going to really test the resiliency of a physical twin and also the sort of waterproofing we've done on the riverbed. So I'll zoom into my digital river and open up my hydrology panel so we can have a good look at the action. So Richard, would you please initiate the climate simulation model? So as the rain starts to fall, the physical river is starting to fill up. And soon we should see that the sensor on the riverbed is going to pick up on that change. A little bit of a waiting game. And that's reflected in the digital river. Now, because we're bringing that data across to the digital twin, we can make use of some of the real-time analytics in the ArcGIS system. So we can, for one, monitor the river level, but also, as you may have seen with the notifications, monitor how many flooded properties we're getting with some simple geometry queries. But unfortunately for the physical twin, the rain did not come alone. Now I'm going to invite Storm Richard again to put our twins through their paces. So Richard, would you act out the wind for me? So because of the strong winds, a number of trees have fallen down, including one that's taken out a power line, taking that out of service. And also, as you may have seen with the lights going off there, and also in the digital twin, it's knocked out the power for this neighborhood here in, we're going to get the camera right, neighborhood here in the center. But this is clearly impacted beyond the electric network. So the removal of this power line triggered an update of the utility network data sets that underlie much of the functionality you're seeing in our digital twins. So for those who haven't worked with them before, utility networks are Esri's tools for creating digital twins of utility networks. We're using two here, one for the town's water network and one for the town's electricity network. And because we've got two of these and they're both enriched with coordinates, we can link them with geography. And that means we can model the complex relationships between an electric network and a water network. So if we just look at the digital twin for a moment, and I open up my utility metrics panel so we can see what effect that's had. We've got those buildings in red, which suggests they've got no power. Half the town is also covered in an orange polygon, suggesting that they have no water. That means that potentially for this side of the town, the water network was reliant on that electricity connection. So in the first half of this demo, I've demonstrated how sensors and real-time data feeds are invaluable when providing insights when we're monitoring complex impacts across very complicated interconnected systems. In the second half, we're going to change gears a little bit and explore how our physical twin and our digital twin can be used to support decisions that are going to enhance the future resiliency of the town. So you can probably see at the bottom, we've got a notification telling us that we've got a refuge centre offline. So refuge centres are set up by the local resilience forum to provide shelter, amenities, and information for those in need during storms. So let's check where these are. We can see we've got two centres with the blue building icons, one on each side of the river. But it looks like this one over here on the right is located within this cluster of red buildings and also within the area of the orange polygon, meaning that it's no longer with power or running water. But before we can analyze what impact this is going to have, we'll first need to know who is trying to access these centres. So the Local Resilience Forum is responsible for helping the towns most vulnerable, and one of their first goals will be to find out exactly who those people are, where they're located, and whether or not they can access these centres. But this comes with a challenge that I'm sure many of you have faced. Here in the Local Resilience Forum, we're working in a multi-agency partnership involving multiple agencies who each store their data in different formats and different file types. In our digital twin, though, we've built an AI solution to kind of streamline this collaboration. So in this panel on the left, this is going to allow me to process any unstructured data, such as our vulnerable persons lists, from each of our agencies in the partnership, regardless of their structure. So if I click Upload Files, we can see here that the data is in different formats. So I think I've got a CSV here, a GeoJSON, and a KMZ file. Now, I can select these and click Upload. So this will use natural language processing and automatically geocode these onto the map, either as a temporary graphics layer or as a feature layer. Since we're dealing with very sensitive data here, I think it's right that we store this as a temporary graphics layer only for the duration of this crisis. So I'll click Save and Close and wait for that to do its analysis. And there we go. We've got our vulnerable people added to the map. So all this is done with just a few clicks and no need to comb through those different files manually to process the data. So now that we've got our vulnerable people identified and mapped, we need to check whether they're able to access one of the refuge centres. We can run routing analysis in our digital twin. And the analysis is displayed in both the routes that appear in the map and the metrics on the left. As we know from this notification at the bottom, one of our refuge centres is offline. This means all the vulnerable persons will need to relocate to the other refuge centre across the river. So the routing is telling me that there's a critical access point to connect these two sides of the town. And since we're going across a river, it is the bridge. And it's this very elaborate suspension bridge here. But what happens if the storm increase and water levels continue to rise? The bridge could flood or debris could be swept onto it, blocking anyone from using it or putting those on it in danger. So let's head back over to Richard and to our physical twin and see what happens when the bridge is removed. So Richard, would you please do the honors? So the live sensors have communicated this through to our digital twin, and now we can see from both the routing in the map and the metrics panel on the left that about 40% of the vulnerable people are no longer able to access any refuge centre at all. So using a digital twin to model scenarios like a storm allows the weakest points in the town to be identified. But it's important not to forget that this is reliant on collaboration between the many agencies that respond to events like this, such as the utility companies, the emergency services, the local authority, and many more. It's only through combining these typically disparate systems through their shared geography that we can see how they interact together and see where their interdependencies lie. So with these identified, we can work on amending them and increasing the resiliency of the town for the future. So let's take a look now at how we can do this. So one of the events, if you remember, that had the biggest impact was the electricity network being disconnected. This led to a quarter of the town losing power, including, unfortunately, one of the refuge centres, which made it more difficult for vulnerable people to access the aid that they needed. In turn, the loss of this connection impacted one of the water pumping stations and resulted in over half the town losing water. The reason that we can understand this butterfly effect, all from the pylon falling over, is because in our digital twin, we're taking networks such as electric, water, and transport that are usually analysed individually and uniting them through geography. So not only can the digital twin be used to identify key weaknesses in these networks, but it can also be used to model solutions. So knowing that the falling pylon caused the catastrophic domino effect, we can model an alternative. So this is, again, because our physical twin contains a live utility network and is constantly running traces to identify breaks in the network. So heading back over to the physical twin, Richard, can you please try locating that pylon away from the tree line? So I can see that's moved the pylon. And also that the power to the network has been restored. The water is running again to the effective buildings. And even though the crossing over the bridge is still disrupted, all vulnerable persons can now access the refuge centres. So while it seems like this decision was solely the remit of the electric company, by kind of modelling these events and all this data together through the shared geography in our digital twin, we've been able to identify a very mutually beneficial investment for all the stakeholders involved. But it's important to note that it's, again, the shared geography that enables us to unite these networks and fully understand how they work in tandem to keep the town running and how we can start to build resiliency for the future. So that's me, and that's our physical twin. And thank you very much. Back to you, Mark.
Thanks very much, Matthew and Richard, and also really important to acknowledge Helena, who sadly can't be here this afternoon, but she's put a huge amount of work into this as well. I mean, what these guys have just shown is the power of what is possible as we collaborate in real time across multiple agencies, using geography as that index that intrinsically links these systems together. And this morning, I talked a little bit about you in the room and your organizations being the custodians of that data that makes up a digital twin of the whole of the United Kingdom. I hope that you can project some of that onto this and see actually the opportunity that we have, the capabilities that we have here to do this stuff are here today. They are production ready today. Actually, the question for us as a shared community is, how are we going to respond to this? What can we do collectively to bring more of that insight and bring more of that resilience and stability, to solve some of those challenges, to unite our world and protect and to shape our future? So I'm just about to hand back to Hattie, but just before I do that, this is the research team at Esri UK. Mathew called this a labour of love. This model is it's a feat of engineering, really. It's been months of work. They've done an incredible job. It's actually geographically correct. The contours are individually laser cut according to the World Elevation Service and painstakingly glued together. They've actively modelled 3 different types of networks with sensors. They've spent time in ArcGIS creating the digital twin that you see behind us, all to tell that story about uniting our world and bringing insight. So look, let's thank the research team at Esri UK. Let's give them a big hand.